World War II was the largest scale war ever fought, even to today. The fate of a race, and even our world as a whole, depended on who emerged victorious. The Allies consisted of the United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and several other European and American countries. The Axis consisted mainly of Germany, Japan, and Italy. The Axis-controlled Europe seemed almost impenetrable to the Allies, and in order to succeed in the liberation of Europe, a foothold had to be attained. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the storming of the beaches of Normandy, France came into play. That one invasion shifted the tide of the war. D-Day by Tim Kaine, Jimmy Bedingfield, Matt Ferraro, and Chirag Patel.
Before the invasion, Western Europe was almost entirely under solid control of Germany, except parts of Italy and Greece where the Allies had invaded. The Eastern Front was in chaos. Germany was attempting to invade Russia, who was beginning to wear out. The Nazis controlled practically everything east of Moscow, Russia. If they continued to capture Russia, oil-rich Caucasus could fall into German hands, meaning more resources for the Axis domination. The Russians needed relief for this dire situation, and so an invasion plan was demanded by Russian leader Joseph Stalin. A new front had to be opened to the east in order to ease the German vice grip on Russia. At the Tehran Conference in Iran, the Big Three, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, met to discuss the new invasion. At this conference, it was agreed between the three powers that an invasion on the Eastern Front would commence and an alliance would be formed for the war. This invasion spot of Normandy, France was chosen. The Allies had air superiority in the area and could easily bomb the German defenses, making way for foot soldiers. The defenses weren't even the strongest at Normandy. The Axis spent much of their time fortifying other possible landing sites. Also, the Germans' main forces were not stationed near Normandy, giving the Allies a power advantage and more time before the enemy's main forces could even arrive. And to ensure a better battle for the Allies, tactics to deceive the Axis were put into play. To create an element of surprise and ease the German opposition at the invasion, deception tactics were used. The enemy believed the invasion was going to be at Pas-de-Calais in northern France, and so the Allies played a trick on them. Using Hollywood props such as inflatable balloons and tanks, plywood artillery guns, fake camps, and campfires, a dummy invasion was placed in Pas-de-Calais, led by General George Patton. General Patton was sent to command this dummy army as punishment for his profane language and actions against some of his fellow soldiers. But his punishment served as one of the greatest deceptions in history. Huge numbers of German soldiers were sent to fight this fake army, giving the Normandy invasion a huge window of opportunity. Further deception tactics included utilizing Axis spies in Britain by feeding false information of several possible landing sites, even including Normandy and Pas-de-Calais. Many of those spies changed sides and worked for the Allies instead. The weather was also used to deceive the Axis. Forecasts called for poor weather at the beaches of Normandy, only further removing suspicion of the true landing site. To prepare for the invasion of Normandy, the area had been scouted even before the final location was set. Recon planes flew over the beaches to obtain information of defenses and fortifications. This enabled soldiers to destroy and break through those fortifications during the actual assault. To prepare soldiers for the invasion, countless hours of training and simulations were conducted. Much of the training was done at the Combining Training Centre Logs in Scotland from July 1943 to March 1944. Soldiers were prepared for breaking through defenses as well as fighting in the geographical conditions of Normandy. The invasion plan consisted of marine landings, paratrooper airdrops, and several Air Force bombing runs. Bombers would leave at midnight so that they could break down defenses and fortifications before the foot soldiers landed in the morning, allowing for an easier path inland. As for the landing zones on the Normandy beaches, there were 5, codenamed Gold, Juno, Sword, Utah, and Omaha. Soldiers who landed at these beaches would then set up command posts 100 yards inland. They would then meet up with the dropped paratroopers and push forward into the Axis territory, fighting off enemy soldiers along the way. One last fact on the invasion was left before it could commence: the weather. Winston Churchill himself spoke of the weather as being of prime importance to the air forces, affecting both the bombing and the landing. If winds were too harsh, bombing runs would be less accurate and even more difficult. Savage waves could cost the lives of soldiers who were to be dropped by boat. Boat landings would be hard to perform. The weather conditions were so key to the invasion that commanders would hold meetings twice a day just to study weather reports. And although the weather was a nuisance to the Allies, it served to help them, further deceiving the Axis, who thought the weather was too poor for a Normandy landing. The invasion was originally scheduled for June 5th of 1944, but was pushed back 24 hours to June 6th due to the weather. Starting at midnight, June 6, 1944, the invasion of Normandy, France commenced. The battle that would be known as one of the most significant turning points in World War II began. At midnight, 24,000 paratroopers were dropped along the French coastline. This first wave, the soldiers did anything from securing bridges to cutting enemy communications to blocking paths for enemy reinforcements. Officer Reichsmarschall Göring of the German army expressed the importance of the paratroopers when he was interviewed shortly after the battle. "I believe that you would not have been successful with your invasion had you not employed paratroopers. They were a big surprise to us. They captured a series of strong points without much opposition." Beginning at 0200 on the invasion day, 1,000 Royal Air Force bombers deployed from the beaches of southern England to weaken German coastal fortifications. In the months prior, communication stations and railroads were bombed to prevent enemy reinforcements and cause difficulty for the Germans to resupply. These bombing runs were crucial to allow the paratroopers and other foot soldiers to accomplish their tasks. By 6:30, American foot soldier landing boats arrived at Utah and Omaha beaches, and by 7:30, Canadian and British soldiers landed on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. All soldiers immediately began to fight their way into the land through fortifications. Bombs were being dropped everywhere. Smoke, fog, and enemy fire covered the air. The battlefield was chaos, with soldiers being killed every minute, paratroopers being dropped off target, and bullets whizzing back and forth in a calm response of gunfire. By evening, 14,000 tons of explosives had been dropped on German territory. By day's end, the Allies emerged victorious. Several casualties resulted on both sides of the battle. From the Americans, about 6,603 people were killed, 3,184 people were wounded, 1,928 were missing, and 26 soldiers were captured. A total of 650 airborne soldiers were either killed, wounded, or went missing. About 1,000 soldiers were wounded, missing, or taken prisoner from the Canadian forces, and 3,500 from the British forces. As for the Germans, 28 generals, 554 commanders, and 250,000 men were killed.
And they had of that group there were a few thousand of them, a couple of thousand, I forget the number. Handful survived, just a handful. Because you didn't give them much quarter at all, and they didn't give you any quarter either. So sometimes it got very vicious, and other times it didn't. That's just war. That's just war.
Several mistakes were made by the Axis that enabled the Allied victory. For one, Germany had an excessive amount of soldiers stationed on the Eastern Front fighting their former ally, the Soviet Union. If more had been moved to defend this attack, the outcome could have been different. Most historians argue that this was a mistake on Hitler's part and that they should have focused more on the Western Front. In preparation for the battle itself, the Axis didn't have enough soldiers stationed in Normandy to defend from the invasion. Believing the attack was to come from elsewhere, Hitler stationed troops on other rumored landing sites, such as Pas-de-Calais. Another mistake that Hitler made was not inspecting the Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall was the greatest series of fortifications and defenses set up along the Western European coastline. After its creation was finished being built, he never bothered to get it inspected, and so the Allies found their way through parts of his greatest fortification. Later, Hitler failed to send more soldiers to Normandy. Believing the Normandy invasion was a distraction, he didn't want to risk sending troops to the wrong location. He believed the real attack was coming from the northwest throughout the invasion. The Germans' morale was significantly dropped as a result of D-Day. They were bewildered and angry at the Allied success. However, the American and Allied morale was boosted for the rest of the war. This heightened morale enabled the victory of the war itself. The Allied side showed D-Day as a huge success. Reporters and photographers even came with troops to the beaches to give a real view on the Allied success. The Axis, however, stretched the truth about what happened and gave the public excuses, claiming, for example, that they were handicapped by the weather. The German media still admitted to Allied success, angering citizens. A huge reason for the success of D-Day is the Mulberry Harbor. Two of these prefabricated ports were towed onto beaches Omaha and Gold. These harbors let boats with supplies and soldiers come onto land easy, despite any weather problems. They are supply hubs that were important to D-Day and World War II itself. D-Day served to create a crack in the wall of the Axis. The occupation of land meant the Allies had a foothold on the Axis territory from which they continued onward. Along with the capturing of territory came the harbors to which supplies passed through. The Mulberry Bee, established for D-Day, remained a key resupply point throughout the war. With the point to gather troops, further fights were able to commence. If D-Day hadn't occurred, it would have been near impossible for soldiers to enter Axis territory. The work of the soldiers in D-Day and World War II is not forgotten. Memorials remain in dedication to the work from those years. In Canada, there is a memorial shaped like a cross dedicated to all the Canadian soldiers who fought in D-Day. In Normandy, there is a refurbished tank nicknamed Bold and sunk during D-Day in commendation to all the Canadians who fought during D-Day.
D-Day was a key turning point during World War II. At a time when the Axis had Europe on lockdown, D-Day drove through the once thought impenetrable wall. Soldiers fought and secured a foothold in the territory, which was then used to funnel in soldiers and supplies by the masses. These troops were able to fight onward and break down the Axis for victory on May 8, 1945. If D-Day hadn't occurred and set up these resupply centers, the Allies might not have been victorious, and modern times would be very different. For this reason, D-Day is a major turning point in history.